Right, which is great. So, sorry, just to introduce myself, my name's Sam Gurney. I'm the Regional Secretary for the TUC region, which covers London, the East of England and the South East. This is the second of a series of webinars which we've been organising on support for insourcing campaigns. It comes under, it's part of our commitment to support the Our Work Matters campaign, which is a national campaign bringing together 5 of our unions nationally, but in our region also the CWU. So that's Unison, Unite, GMB, PCS, RMT, and CWU, supporting work to organise outsourced workers and to support insourcing. We had our first seminar a little while ago, which was looking at various aspects of what you could do to make the case for insourcing. And just a reminder on housekeeping, which I'll come on to, if people could mute.
Thank you.
If you are, I'll come back to the etiquette bit in a second. So as I said, please use, so this is the second of our series of webinars. There will be more. We've got 2 excellent speakers for you. So in a minute, I'm going to kick off by just outlining the Unison organising guide. Then we're going to come to Ezekiel Kramer from Unison London region, who's going to talk about a campaign they've been running specifically at King's University, King's College, but he'll talk about other aspects of their work as well. And Alex Etches from GMB Southern region, who is, thank you very much, Alex, filling in. Advertised was Helen O'Connor from GMB. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it today, but we've got Alex. She's going to be excellent, talking about the work that GMB have been doing on this area and some of the campaigns they've been running. Hopefully, that will take us up to just a bit before 3 o'clock, and that will give us plenty of time for colleagues to ask questions or come in with their experiences of organising as well. So thank you very much. I'm just wondering if I can mute Teams, not Zoom. I'm not so used to it. I can't mute it, so I've just got lots of pinging in my ears. Just in terms of etiquette, online etiquette on a meeting, please do keep yourselves on mute unless we call you in to speak when we get to the question and answer section. When you come to that bit, if you do want to come in, do be thinking about things to raise as our speakers are talking. But obviously, the quicker and more concise you can keep your interventions, the more people we can get in. So that would be great. So our aim today is to kick off by sharing the model framework on an insourcing campaign, which Unison have been using, but then to have our speakers talking about practical aspects of the work they've been doing. Obviously, the government, in the run-up to the election, committed to a massive wave of insourcing. We've got the employment bill kind of in draft out there. We've got the commitment to really improving on a 2-tier workforce, but we're waiting to see quite a lot of movement on other areas. We know we've got some ongoing disputes in the region at the moment, both people in NHS trusts where they're at risk of being outsourced, where their trusts are trying to outsource more workers as well as bring people back in-house. We've got the PCS dispute at the moment across a number of government departments. So we've got live disputes at the moment, and we'll definitely want to come back to that and where we are with the government probably at the next webinar. But again, you can feel free to ask questions about that, but I think we'll focus the next webinar on that.
You had booty slippers.
So just going to mute.
Oh, right. And you haven't done.
Thank you. Right, okay, so I've put a link in the chat to the guide. Unison have produced that kind of detailed guide, and we touched on it in the last presentation. It's been updated, and it now includes model surveys and case studies, a planning template and checklists, and key arguments and key targets. It's a 5-point phased model to how to win an insourcing campaign. My colleague Daniel, who's been working a lot on this for us, has put together a briefing which I'm just going to read out. And I said we put the link into the chat, and we'll circulate that to people afterwards. Phase 1 of that is research and campaign development. Like in any campaign, that involves asking lots of questions. Obviously, that's very much true of an insourcing campaign. The key point which Unison and colleagues in other unions have been making when we've been talking about is avoiding the urge to jump straight into a campaign and actually laying the foundations for the work first by identifying the scope of a campaign, what you want to win and how you're going to win it. It's like any organising campaign, but key areas and questions are covered in the guide. What's the main target? Which outsourced service or services do you want to insource? As it says, that maybe seem obvious, but once you start going deeper into it and start finding out some of the links, it can become much more complex quite quickly. So what contracts are outsourced, which of the companies that run them, why were they outsourced in the first place? When did they start? And obviously, crucially, when are the contracts up? When will they need to be renewed? How many people are employed on each of these contracts, which again, we know with outsourced contracts can sometimes be quite hard to find out. What jobs are they doing? What are their current terms and conditions? And what are the demographics of the workforce is involved? So that's kind of first bit of mapping. Second bit is who at the public authority or commissioning body ultimately makes the decision to insource, so who is actually the target. And once you know that, it's looking at their motivations and how you can exert the most influence and leverage on them, and crucially, who are the potential allies in any campaign. Looking, and the guide again sets out very clearly, some proper work into what are the key workplace issues that can be highlighted in the campaign. So there will be many workplace issues, but what were ones which you can draw out for most to highlight why insourcing will provide a solution? So are there people doing similar jobs on different terms and conditions or pay, which is nearly always the case at the moment with a weak two-tier kind of guidance we've got? Would insourcing help with equal pay issues? And anyone who's on the last one of these webinars will know that we had the colleagues from Queen Mary University who produced a really useful guide to equalities and outsourcing, how to stop outsourcing by using kind of equalities arguments. What are the arguments for insourcing being cheaper for the commissioning authority or public authority and a better provider of services? So looking at kind of all aspects. And then starting to do mapping on what the baseline level of union membership and activism is amongst those outsourced staff, and identifying how the campaign will be used to grow membership and increase participation. Once you've got the answers to those questions, and you can collate the information and finalise targets for the campaign, and make a proper assessment about the time it's going to take and the extra resources you'll need. The recommendation, depending on the scale of a campaign, is to establish a campaign team or an organising committee to develop a timeline and a resource plan, which will involve getting in support from your regional and national union, and then looking at how you kind of really build that, drawing in leaders in the workplace, as well as full-time officials and staff. So getting that plan in place first, phase one. I'll be quick on these next two, honestly. Phase two, building the base. So with that strong base of information and a clear strategy, then moving on to the practical, before you even launch the campaign, having that idea of a scope and the phases in which you're going to kind of run it, developing relationships with community and political allies, starting to organise in the workplace before the campaign begins to increase membership and make sure you've got the activists and reps kind of in place, confirming the issues that you think you're going to be kind of really majoring on with the membership, having that strong and organised membership base there. And I think we'll definitely hear about this from Alex and Ezekiel in a minute, but it's been critical to all the campaigns we've been working with colleagues on across those different unions at the moment. So then by the end of that, building the base phase, you should have finalised your plan to win and be ready to launch that launch the campaign. So launching the insourcing campaign is phase three. By the time you launch the campaign, you should be in a position of strength. It should be absolutely vital that the plan to win has the confidence of the membership, because it's really going to need their participation as we go through. Again, we'll hear about that in a minute, giving the members that sense of ownership and responsibility, and then making sure that can generate the increased membership you're going to need to see this through. Phase four, I quite like this title. This is what it says in the document, is escalate and create crisis, brackets, for the decision makers, not for us, but building up to that kind of phase where the pressure you're putting on whoever has the power to insource through kind of the open displays, such as badge days, harder actions could be industrial action, but meetings and rallies as well. If you do need to move to a formal ballot for action, then obviously making sure that you've got everything lined up well in advance of that, given the hoops we all know we have to go through to win a ballot at the moment. But we've seen successful ballots across many different workplaces over the last couple of years on these issues. But escalating to that, building up to that, making sure that pressure is building on the decision makers, making sure they've got time to actually respond and hopefully agree to a plan to insource. But if you don't give it, as I said, creating this crisis which forces them to actually come back to the table. And then finally, phase five is titled Win, Celebrate, Review and Sustain. And again, one of the things that we've been talking to lots of organisers about is that hopefully you will win the campaign, but then it's about keeping the membership growing, it's about keeping the membership building, it's about the fact that we all know insourcing is not a silver bullet on lots of issues to do with terms and pay and conditions. At the last seminar we had Tabassum Ahmed from Unite talking about their campaign over at the Barts Trust, where 1,500 workers were brought back in-house. But then there was another big ongoing campaign to make sure we actually got the working during COVID bonus, the same as other in-house NHS staff. So we know it's not a silver bullet, but it is very much a step on that in the right direction to improving conditions. But having to keep people together, keep membership up, make sure that people who've become more active during the campaigns stay involved and take up positions as reps within the union. So I say it's a 5-phase campaign. We put that link to the guidance in the chat. Other unions have got some really good guidance. We've been looking at a lot at some of the PCS work on this as well. We've got a shared site that officers from different unions within the region who are on our Work Matters campaign have been using to kind of share campaign material, but other information like this to make sure that we can all benefit from each other's knowledge and experience. So anyway, that was very much for kind of the theory of that 5-stage, but the practical bit for this session is actually to hear from Ezekiel and Alex about how they've been putting this type of work into practice on the ground in real life campaigns. So I'm going to turn to them now to give that overview of how they've been running their campaigns. And as I say, once they've done that, we'll come back to open it up for questions and discussion. So please be thinking about those questions as well. Ezekiel, very pleased to hand over to you first. As I said, Ezekiel's an organiser with Unison London region. Hopefully you'll introduce yourself a little bit more and then go straight into your campaign stuff. Thank you, Ezekiel.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Well, I would like to thank you, TUC, for organizing this webinar. Thank you, Sam, Daniel, and Jane, and thank you everybody who's attending this seminar today. We hope you find this quite helpful. So, as Sam said, I'm Ezekiel Kramer. I'm a regional organizer in Greater London, the regions. I'm going to talk about the Unison campaign for insourcing at King College, London. So the campaign started in 2014. I was a local organizer at the time and 10 years younger than I am now. So it's distant memory, but it's really, really beautiful what happened at King College and the work that the branch and the members have done and the win we managed to achieve. So just to start a bit of how it started. But first of all, there was a growing willingness for campaign for insourcing at the time. There was Unison campaign running at several universities, and we said, okay, why don't we do this at King College? But of course, the first step was not just to launch the campaign, as the Caroline actually explained. So the first step was there have to be the willingness and the resources to be able to run this campaign, because these kind of campaigns are actually very, very demanding. Demanding on organizers, demanding on the branch, particularly when the branch doesn't have facility time. They are all volunteers and activists, and mainly none of the actually members of the branch committee comes actually for that workforce. And we have very little members. We got only a few members over there. So the first step was, we're going to do this, but in order to do this, we need to organize. So we need to actually start visiting the workplaces at the time they work. So there was a lot of 4 o'clock in the morning, being outside different buildings, talking to the cleaners and security. There was a lot of evenings, a lot of weekends, in order to talk to the members, to find out what the issues were. And of course, insourcing for them was something quite distant. A lot of them didn't understand what insourcing was. So that's not something that you go over there and say, hey, let's campaign for insourcing. So no, so the step number one is you carry out the research. So what are the companies operating at King College University? What is the company that actually provide the cleaning services? What the company that provide the security services? So you find out all the information, and then you start doing your match. And then we find out that we didn't have a lot of members. So step number one, let's talk to them. And it was a very long process of talking to the members, listening to their concerns. And we find out that the most important for them was things that maybe we were overlooking. For example, most of them were migrant workers, and they wanted to go on holiday for longer. So they didn't care much about the insourcing campaign at the time. What they care about was I want better treatment. I'm working for a company that treat me badly. Um, Pay is always incorrect. I'm not allowed to go on holiday for more than a week or two at a time, and I want to travel abroad because my family is abroad. A lot of grievances, a lot of disciplinary process going on. So that's where we focus, but focus on what matters to them. And that was thanks to listening to engagement with all the members. Apart from the fact that there was an issue with the language barrier, but I speak Spanish, so that was quite beneficial for the beginning of the campaign. And the brand secretary at the time also spoke a bit of Spanish, so that helped a lot in order for level of engagement with the members. 90% of the cleaners are Latin Americans, and that's why the language, overcoming the language barrier was one of the key aspects in order to progress with that campaign. And resources allocation. So the brand committee made a decision that it was a priority for the branch to organize this workforce. And also from the region, allocating a resource at the time, it was me as a local organizer, and my colleagues as well for the region was equally important. So you start building the trust, you start building the confidence, and also, but you have to achieve something. You have to have that winning. You have to have that collectiveness. And we used to have meetings on Saturday where there were 40 or 60 members, and attending that they wanted to campaign. They wanted to do something. They wanted to improve their working situations. And the working situation was not just that much about, oh, I'm gonna get a lot better pay if I'm in source. It was about my sick pay is statutory sick pay. So if I go sick for 3 days when I do a manual work, then I don't get pay. I only have 28 days of annual leave, including my holiday. That's not enough. So the question is, what insourcing meant for the workers at the time? What is the benefit that you will get? And one of the key aspects that really was really important to the members was dignity at work. They felt that being outsourced and the way they were treated by this company was unacceptable. And the whole campaign about insourcing was about dignity and respect at work, equal terms and conditions for all. And that was the main title of the campaign. But it took long time. It took 6 to 8 months in order to organize, or even longer, in order for all the members to come together and to have these 50, 60, or even 80 members attending a meeting on a weekend. And we started to increase visibility at the time. But the visibility was around, first of all, organize your workplaces, having a good membership density, elect your representative in each of the buildings that we had in each of the sites. King College is a very big university divided mainly on 3 campuses, but we're talking about 70 plus buildings. So it was a lot of mapping, a lot of working, a lot of effort to actually contact everybody that worked for King College University. And the campaign started with the cleaners, and the cleaners were actually at the forefront of the campaign for the quality. So we identified when the contract ended, and that was quite helpful. So we knew that we had 3 or 4 years where the contract was coming to an end. So we have to target that renewal of the contract to prevent for that contract to be renewed. And to bring back in house. So we timed that as the end day of the campaign should be the year where the contract comes to an end. So we had 3 or 4 years planning. So we presented the idea. Members actually really loved the idea of being in house and the benefit that created, but there was a lot of grievances at the time. So what we focused on, it was in addressing the grievances that they had regarding pay, working condition, lack of equipment, everything that was kind of overlooked if you look at the insourcing campaign. So we will go into details. That what matters, and that's what we started campaigning for, the local issues. We started to have protests, and we actually ended up taking extract actions on the back of the local issues that the members were facing at the time, because they were outsourced. Issues that they would not have faced if they were insourcing. So they start by local winnings, and the small wins that we had through time, it built their trust and their confidence that collectivism was going to bring about a real changes. And the real change was the time has come, we can do this, we can win the insourcing campaign. And at that time was when the security officers saw what the cleaners have achieved, and they also wanted to join the insourcing campaign. And the insourcing campaign became a cleaners and security coming together for these two main contracts, which the both contracts, which is Italian's Best and CIS, there was about 455 members of staff that were employed by these two corporations. So a lot of campaigning, a lot of lobby for the council, a lot of protests, a lot of meetings, a lot of flags, leaflets, waving, a lot of communications with colleagues from the Labour Party, a lot of emails. Also, we set up this campaign committee. We look for allies, so we present a motion to the student union as well to support the campaign for the sourcing. The student union supported it, so we created a student support network as well. It created some very positive to work with the students, also create a bit of challenges because we need to make sure that the campaign is led by our members. Even though it was a mixed approach in the beginning where the Unison officials and the brand committee drafted it, then we make sure that members took ownership, and where the student support was really, really important. But at the same time, we have to the boundaries of what is a support group and what is actually those who lead the campaign, and the decision making should be always be from the workers. And then
Western Railway service to London Paddington.
So, and then we went to, someone's going to Paddington. So, and then we went to the escalated the campaign when we see, okay, we want this benefit, the allowing to travel more time, to go on holidays and so forth, but that's not enough. We want full contractual parity. So we make the financial assessment about the situation of King College and the affordability of the claims, and also about the principles and values that King College had that completely contradicted the idea of having these members of staff being treated on the way they were treated by these contractors. So through the negotiation, we were balloting again. There was a lot of escalations all the time. It wasn't easy. We had a lot of challenges, a lot of challenges. Imagine that you are running a 4 years long campaign. You need to keep your members motivated throughout 4 years. So the resources, it was really resource intensive all the time. And the amount of grievances that we have to deal with, it was just incredible. You wouldn't have that in any other place but to a company that outsource these contractors. So, and then, but building those momentum, building these wins and building that trust and that confidence, we decided that it was time, launch the campaign, get activist network. We are actually got support from the student union, from our colleagues on the UCU as well, and that when things escalated rapidly and we start to disrupt open days for the university. We had we disrupt lectures as well that took place because UCU was colleagues in the UCU was giving lectures on the insourcing campaign from Unison to the clearance and security. So visibility was just everywhere, and we were going to college every week, in order to increase that visibility. And then the escalation was when we were against in dispute with King College, and then through a lot of pressure, then the King College University decided to insource the cleaners and security on that on 2019. So the decision was taken about in 2018 by the board of trustees that met with us, and we actually try and manage to convince them with their local representative of why insourcing was important. And that was the beginning of a new campaign. So you won the insourcing campaign, absolutely brilliant, fantastic decisions being taken. Now you need to make sure that insourcing bring contractual parity. and what contractual parity means. And that actually means studying all the different contracts that you got at King College, the harmonized terms and conditions, and making sure that those members of staff who are being transferred are actually being transferred on King College contracts and not on the outsourced contracts. And that was 12-month negotiations in order to make sure that they were transferred on equal terms and conditions. And then insourcing happened. And when insourcing happened, then another campaign started. Because as Sam said, yeah, insourcing is great, but insourcing doesn't resolve all the grievances for those members, because those members of staff are actually continue working on social hours and continue being treated slightly different, because it kind of, when they are being insourced, they still ought to organizations. So for example, we have a lot of problems about communication, language, so we have to actually push King College to translate some of the policies into different languages, because a member who were transferring spoke several languages, wasn't just English. So King College have to create this cleaning and security department within the state of facilities that actually deal with all these particular sectors. So we have dialogue with them and make sure that they are treating equally. However, yes, insourcing resolve a lot of the grievances. So now they're being paid on time, for example, which was a very big issue at the time. But there is ongoing issues and ongoing concerns following insourcing. And King College is just an employer. On the same time, on the same way that we got issues with King College before the insourcing, then we got issues with King College following the insourcing. So for example, now it transpired that some members of staff at King College receive an unsocial working hours allowance, which is an extra 10% or 20% of their base salary. And yes, cleaners and security do not. So we are campaigning for cleaners and security who work on social hours to actually receive the same pay that other members of staff are receiving. So I'm saying insourcing is, you win the insourcing and it's great, you celebrate, and then you start a new campaign, and then you win and you start a new campaign. So it's organizing is never ending. So when you win something, and you at that moment you start campaigning for something else. So you create the momentum, you continue with electing representative, continue training your representative, continue building up the organizing base at King College on the cleaning security. It's just non-stop. It's huge steps, it's huge improvements, but it's the beginning of something new.
Ezekiel, oh,
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. That was really good, and that was incredibly well timed as well in terms of just going through an awful lot of detail. As I said, we've been joined by other colleagues online, so I just said, for benefit of colleagues who've joined us while you were doing your presentation, we're going to have Ezekiel, who's just spoken from Unison. We've got Alex now from GMB Southern Region, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. If colleagues could stay on mute until we ask you to come in, that'd be great. But Ezekiel, thank you. You've given hopefully people lots of food for thought there, and questions and discussion afterwards. Thanks as well to the colleagues who in the chat have been putting pictures up about some of the action which is ongoing. I said within the region and government departments. I know there's lots of action happening outside our region as well, and people have got SPCS information up there as well about the East Kilbride part of this dispute, and I've put in a link to the megaphone petition as well for colleagues up in Sheffield Hallam, HMRC colleagues up there. So it's a link into an active PCS campaign on megaphone as well, just letting a few more people in. Alex, if we can turn to you, that'd be fantastic. So we're delighted to have Alex standing in for Helen O'Connor, who many of you will know. Alex has been working with Helen, I think, on lots of those campaigns. Alex, over to you.
Thank you for having me, and I'm happy to fill in Helen's very big shoes. I think that was an excellent overview of a really great campaign, and the document that Unison has produced is like bread and butter campaigning. It's really, really good, really useful, lots of detail in there. So I highly recommend everyone reads it. I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly, because we've taken a little bit of a different spin on outsourcing campaigns, and you'll get to understand why as I kind of ramble on a little bit. So I've been a paid organizer now for 6 years for various different unions. At the moment, I'm with the GMB and hopefully for many years afterwards. Previous to that, I was in a smaller union called UVW, was involved in organising rural parts workers and Great Ormond Street Hospital workers against outsourcing specifically. In GMB, I've organised various disputes across the economy, mainly with outsourced workers. To list a few: Westminster traffic wardens, Ardie Verde parts workers in Merton and Sutton, Veolia refuse workers, Circa refuse workers, Corey waste transfer, and now Abcoa parking wardens in Wandsworth, Richmond, Lambeth, and Kingston for strike action. Actually happening on the 11th if we can't agree a pay deal on the 8th. There are lots and lots more, but we obviously need to leave time for discussion, so I'll leave it there. I think it would be helpful for me to share sort of what I've learned about outsourcing, and specifically from these disputes that I've listed. The interesting thing is the sheer extent of which sort of vast layers of society have kind of been siphoned off into private companies in order to extract profit from the basic functions of the state is quite astounding. Basically, the level that it's taken hold in this country. And I think potentially, we get too hyper focused on where we are with one individual contact. We don't see it as sort of a societal wide material process that's kind of eroding the foundations, the very foundations of the state in which we live. I think, I don't need to go into a tremendous amount of detail about why outsourcing is bad, but I mean, I think within that analysis, there's a sort of a gem as to how we can defeat it. So, I mean, obviously outsourcing erodes wages and terms and conditions. That's obvious, but that's not an accident. It's a material function of outsourcing. And the only ways that you can really create profit in this system that we live in is either by charging more for goods, paying less for raw materials used in the production of goods, or reducing the cost of labor it takes to produce that good. In outsourcing, so for example, if you take the parks workers in Ardie Verde, the only way that they're able to make a profit from that contract is by getting paid for the service and then reducing very slowly over time, over the length of that contract, the amount they actually pay for the labor on that contract, and taking the rest of that as profit. They do that by sort of running down the two-peed workers, not replacing them really, but running down the workforce, de-skilling the workforce, and leaving the contract pretty much bare bones by the end of it, but taking a tremendous amount of profit out of the local authority by the end of it too. Secondly, it strips the local authority of the capacity or experience to manage these functions. So one of the main arguments we always get whenever we come to the end of a contract and we start banging the drum for ending outsourcing, sorry, is that they don't have the capacity to run the service. So Merton, Wandsworth, Lambeth, all of these local authorities make the same argument, which is that they've got rid of all of these sort of middle manager positions. They don't have anyone within the local authority that has the understanding of how to manage these contracts, and they would need to build in that experience to bring those contracts back in house. Now, whether that's the truth or not, I still think it's a good thing to understand about outsourcing and the sort of process that takes place over a number of years when the contract's outsourced, and the challenges that then leads to when it comes to making an argument for bringing it back in house. And then finally, of course, it sees a huge transfer of wealth from public funds to private companies that would have previously ended up in the pockets of hundreds of thousands of working class people living in communities across the country. And that's a huge amount of money taken out of the public sector, huge amount of disposable income taken away from where it would have been spent, for example, on local high streets. So all of this happening across the UK in every town, village, hospital, train station, everywhere, and it's a societal issue. But within that, I think there's an understanding of how we beat it. So in every campaign for in-housing I've been involved in, we're always fighting against two groups. We're fighting against the contractor and the contractee. The contractor has an interest in keeping the outsourcing agreement while it's profitable to do so, and the contractee has an interest in keeping the contracting arrangement while it feels it's not capable of running the service directly or because it's got an ideological commitment to it. Now, my first taste of outsourcing was in Royal Parks and Great Ormond Street Hospital, and it took us balloting for strike action and building the sort of campaign that the previous speaker was touched upon very well, which is a deep organising within not just sort of an abstract idea of, well, this is outsourcing's bad because it's unfair on you, but more deep emotional pulls around dignity and respect, around the two-tier workforce being a bad thing, and around their material realities getting better if they were in-housed than if they're at the sort of whim and prey to these privateers in the private market. The problem is that both Royal Parks and Great Ormond Street Hospital, they are two institutions that have a huge stake in maintaining the goodwill of the general public, and therefore that sort of moral pressure that we put on through the campaigns and through building up a coalition of support in wider society was a really good form of leverage, obviously in addition to balloting for taking strike action. But that only goes so far and it only works on certain institutions. So, gosh, Great Ormond Street Hospital, they wanted to end the stigma of outsourcing in all but name, and they brought the ancillary workers back in-house, but they didn't do it by equalising the terms and conditions of in-house workers. And that took further ballot for strike action in order to get them to agree that. And then obviously when it came to the security guard workers that wanted the same thing in the same institution, they kind of shut down and refused to bow to any amount of moral pressure. And there's a real shortcoming if we base our campaigning against outsourcing, I think, on this idea that if we, shame an institution or a group enough, and provoke enough moral outrage that eventually they'll bring this contract back in-house. That will work in some instances, but it's highly dependent on the sort of employer you're taking on. And for me, where I mostly organise in parking services, in waste management, all of that sort of stuff, it's very difficult to get that sort of moral outrage and focus it in onto the decision makers, because these groups of workers are, by their very essence, they're invisible. They start very early in the morning. They're away from the local authorities where all the councillors go and vote, where all the like greater management actually functions and works. Other than in Ivy Verde bringing the strike that we had to the doorstep of the councils, that's not really sustainable, because once that strike is over, these workers go away, the picket line ends, and then you're kind of left with, they're going back to being invisible again, and it's out of those people's minds. So what we've started to do in the GMB is we've tried to look at outsourcing as a material sort of process, and what the key weakness of that material process is, and then base our response to it on targeting that. one weakness. So we've begun to formulate this strategy for outsourced workers. It's very much in its infancy, but the key component to outsourcing, as discussed, is the contractor's ability to profit from the contract through the erosion of wages and terms and conditions. Now, our assessment is if you can make a concerted effort across layers of the market, across layers of these contracts, to raise up wages and erode that profit margin and make it financially impossible for either the contractor or the contractee to either tender the service or take on a contract, basically make it unaffordable because the margins have been eroded so much. Then we think that is a good way of targeting outsourcing and ending it. Now, obviously, to do that, you've got to do what we started doing in traffic enforcement, for example. So it all started with NSL workers in Westminster. We did a campaign very much like the previous speaker did, although it wasn't focused on outsourcing. It's focused basically on wages and getting as big a pay rise as we possibly could. The way that we did that is we organized these workers up to the point of we had pretty much 100% density. We had them agitated basically in a fury, and moved very, very quickly with a ballot. I think it took 2 weeks for this strike action I think we had one offer, which we rejected and went straight to a ballot. And this momentum and that sort of chaos that it created made the contractors' response pretty much null. There wasn't a way that they could mitigate the effects of the strike action. They ended up winning a 19% pay rise up to £15 an hour, which was done over just 3 days of strike action. Other contractors that we've been looking at, Corey Waste Transfer Station, we've negotiated above inflation pay deal after balloting for strike action. And in Abcoa, we've brought together, as I've mentioned, 4 different contracts across southwest London to demand £17 an hour from the parking giant. And they're due to take strike action on the 11th if the deal can't be reached on the 8th. So that is sort of the strategy behind it, is to ratchet up the tension year on year, erode that profit margin, erode those margins away through just consistently throwing basically the might of workers on these contracts against the contracting company, and then building out from one contract, as we did in NSL, to other contracts across the sector, and trying to join these disputes up so that instead of just focusing on one contract, we are building out basically a combine for any of my colleagues in Unite, and trying to reach a point where we can, practically, in practice, have almost a sectoral bargaining, if not only over a region that we're responsible for. The plan, however, has its own issues. Industrial action on a waste contract or a traffic enforcement contract, it only costs the contracting company financially if they're being fined by the body contracting them. So in these circumstances, it'd be the local authority, and too often that's not been the case, either by a Liberal, Democrat, Tory, or even Labour authorities. What I mean is that when you get a withdrawal of labour in the contractual arrangement, you have basically a lot of the time they've been paid for the year to run the contract. They've received a large amount of money en masse, and then there's usually a thing in their contract, a term in their contract that allows a local authority to recoup costs if there's not a performance of the contract. When speaking to officers in Merton Council, where we had industrial action with the parts workers over pay last year, We were told that industrial action is often treated as if it was an act of God. And for those legally versed, it's known as a force majeure clause. It's viewed as if a flood has come in and stopped the performance on the contract, and therefore the contractor has not been issued any fines afforded to the local authority when the contract was signed. I mean, and sometimes these clauses are not even within the contract, and because apparently they add to the overall cost of the contract when it's being put out to tender, and they don't want to make the contract seem less attractive to bid on. So if there's no fines levied against the company by the local authority, then it means two things. It means the residents go without service while the council tax basically funds a company trying to break a strike of its own workers, and also that the company receives money for running the service, but it doesn't have to pay out any of its workforce while it's on strike. While they're on strike, they don't have to pay out any of the wages. So effectively, they'd make far more money in that instance than they would if these workers ever went out on strike. And it creates an unwillingness on the part of the outsourcing company to settle a dispute. And it makes it far more money, as I said, and it almost guarantees that the strike will last for much, much longer than if the contractor was made to bear the financial pressure through the appropriate fines for non-performance. So, I mean, that creates a little quirk in that the local authorities have outsourced the mechanisms for negotiating, pay and settling disputes, but they still hold a lot of the liability if strike happens. And if there's no mechanism for the local authority to leverage the contractor or an unwillingness to use it, then essentially the taxpayer is funding the private company's own private war against its own workers. There needs to be, I think there's a lack of understanding of how this functions in local authorities, in my experience, when pushing these campaigns. And that, I think, is a key part of really ratcheting up the pressure against these companies, is educating the local authorities that contract them out about their responsibilities when there is industrial action on the contracts they've contracted out. So to cut it much shorter than I could go on and on about this, I think the way that we win is absolutely there is no silver bullet, but you have to, when you start these campaigns, you have to be honest with people and say that they're going to have to take strike action in order to win this. You have to start the campaign with workers as if you're not going to get a deal from the boss and you're going to have to take strike action. You want to be honest and upfront with them, and you want them to the idea of that before you start the campaign properly, so that when it does come to strike action, there isn't a falling away and the confidence and momentum is maintained because people have been expecting it all along and it doesn't feel like a surprise to them. I think we need to have an understanding of leverage, and specifically how we financially leverage both the company and the contractee. So, for example, local authority, and specifically around the legal framework set up on a lot of these agreements and these outsourcing agreements, and specifically around non-performance for if strike action happens. Unfortunately, if it's happened to me multiple times, I don't think I'm that unlucky, and I think potentially it is a much broader issue that we need to, as a movement, get a hold of, because functionally that's our leverage. And if we aren't putting a pressure on local authorities or any form of contracting body to ensure that they do invoke these fines and they're not left holding the bag for any sort of industrial action, then it cuts our members' legs away at the knees, and it really sort of diminishes their potential. And then finally, through organising waste workers mainly, actually, and traffic enforcement at the moment, and also some estate cleaners, I think the key is less around a contract by contract basis, but more around looking at outsourcing as a material process, looking at what it needs to function, and then being hyper laser focused on eroding its reason for being, which is creating a two-tier workforce that can extract profit from that difference between what outsourced workers and in-house workers are paid, and doing that at scale to essentially drive the business model into the ground and make sure that it doesn't come back. I think while moral pressure and making sort of an argument specific to in-housing around dignity and respect is handy, especially when you're dealing with an organization that has a huge public facing that is sort of very immediately affected by those sorts of campaigns, like a hospital or a British institution, for example, something that has a lot of face. It can work, but if you're trying to exert moral pressure on a local authority filled with dead-eyed and heartless pragmatists, it's really, you're going to hit a brick wall very fast. So only when that profit motive is broken and there's no more kind of gold left to be raided by these pirates, will they kind of leave our services and our members alone. As I said, it's a very, very broad sort of sweep of what we're trying to do when it comes to outsourced workers in the GMB. It's less focused in on one particular campaign because that's not how we're necessarily seeing it anymore. What we're trying to do is wherever we can, at whatever point we can, is win as high above inflation wage rise as possible, and do that on a systematic basis that brings workers together across these sectors of society and builds their power out to the point where it's just not affordable for these contracts to exist anymore, and it's not something that is going to even be considered when it comes to these groups of workers that are organised.
Alex, thank you. That was excellent, and thank you to you and Ezekiel for sticking to your times and getting in. And I'm sure Ezekiel will come back and say around Unison's kind of approach as well across a number of sectors being very, very similar to that. But there was just a huge amount of stuff in what you both said, and I hope colleagues found useful. We've got a lot of people on the webinar. We've got just under 60 people, so I'm going to try and look. Hopefully, if you can use your electronic hands, I'm hoping it will come up on the side of my screen because I've got it on speaker view. So if people do want to come in, please do. While I'm waiting for some people to come in with points, I think I had, well, to both you and Ezekiel, I think two questions to kick us off, and I think both of you really touched on that point around kind of at the beginning of the campaigns for workers that we're talking about here, many of them on this call, kind of, the dignity, but also the invisibility. And I think that point was really well made, Alex. But leverage is different with different groups of people. So when you're dealing with traffic attendants, as you say, we're kind of like, there's not, as we know, not the most popular group of workers in the whole world with the general public or organised traffic wardens. But it's kind of like, that is a bit different from Great Ormond Street where you've got a corporate leverage. But how did you both kind of, engage with the membership around those dignity points and about the organising points? Because what I've found on every picket line I've been on is just how strong the kind of members have been, and just how vibrant and kind of dynamic it's been once you've got them to that stage when you're on the picket line. But I know it's hard to build people up to that stage. So I'm just wondering about how you both found that. And Ezekiel, you talked about how kind of long it takes. So I've got one question on that. I'd be really interested to know if that's been different with different groups of workers, or if you found that to be kind of similar across the different works. And then the second question I had was that, and I think points about the business model are incredibly important, but that found around that excuse around management not having the capacity to take the contracts back in-house. And we've done a bit of trying to engage with local authorities in our area. We have 169 in our region. But talking to boroughs like Hackney, who did put it into their manifestos and then have, with some issues, delivered on it, but that took political leadership and it took them driving it through. Now, at the moment, when we know our local authorities are facing huge budget constraints, making that case that this will save money, challenging the business model, as you said, two-tier stuff. But can either of you kind of cite good examples where you've been able to work with commissioners to bring stuff back in house, or is it all been a kind of struggle? Are there good practical examples we can use saying, no, X council, it's not impossible to do it. Look, this council have done it, or no, NHS trust or university, this ones have done it. How can we get them to share that experience about how to do it? And those are my two, but as I said, I'm waiting for hands to go up. I'm not seeing any at the moment, but that could just be I'm not getting. And you can put questions in the chat as well, obviously, and I will pick those up.
Sam, you want me to come?
Great. Ezekiel, can you go first? And then we'll go back to Alex.
Yeah.
And then I've got Rachel Bayliss from GMB waiting to come in as well. So we'll come to you afterwards, Rachel.
Great.
Ezekiel, go ahead.
So the first one was the issue around dignity. Dignity and respect felt very strong with all the members because contractors do treat their staff appallingly in the vast majority of the cases. They don't follow policies and procedures. They are badly paid, they're badly treated. So the dignity and respect aspect feels very, very strong, particularly when you compare the way the contractor behave toward the members of staff and as opposed to how the university, for example, treat their own members of staff. So it's a staggering disparity of treatment between the two. And that argument felt very, very strong, not just in higher education, but in every sector when you go a contractor providing a service. And that was always the case. That's what they felt very, very strong about. And that was one of the issues that actually brought members together and said, we deserve better. We have to be treated dignity and respect. Sorry, Sam, what was the second part of the questions or the second question?
So my second one was the one around where we can use, are there good examples out there where management have brought stuff back in-house that we can use to kind of refute the arguments from those who are saying they've so kind of taken away their management capacity to manage these areas of work. So, you know, whether it's King saying in principle, we'd like to bring the cleaners back, but we don't have anyone who can manage the cleaning staff because we've outsourced it all now, or we've outsourced all our parking attendants for the last 10 years. So now it would cost us this much money to try to recreate that. And I said, we know there are some local authorities who've dealt with that and have shown that they can save money, but I don't know if we're doing enough to kind of highlight those examples at the moment. That basically coming back to the point Alex was making about, you know, business case isn't just enough, but we need to subvert the business case by making sure people can't save money by reducing terms and conditions. That's one thing, but also showing that it is possible to do it.
So thank you, Sam. Sorry about that. So, well, at King College, which is the example that we gave, they have to create a new department with both the cleaning and security department, with a new director, head of cleaning, head of security, and also they have to create a separate HR in order to deal with 400 members of staff coming into state and facility. We pretty much double the number of staff by state and facility. It was a success. And that's why we just won the second part of the insourcing campaign at King College, which another 115 members of staff were all broken house in August 2024, which means that at King College at this moment in time, there is no major contractor operating. So that shows that the 2019 was a success story and is working really well. And that led to the university taking the decision through campaigning. It wasn't easy. We members have to take drag actions as well in order to make sure that the contract is not extended. But they brought another 115 insourcing. So it's doable. It's possible. It had to be managed correctly. That's why the first insourcing took between 12 and 18 months on negotiating the contract, also negotiating what bringing them in-house would look like as a department level. It was a lot of work, but it's doable if there is willingness and effort to do so.
Great, thanks. I'll come to you, Alex, just to come back on those points. I'm glad to say people have found their electronic hands now. So I'm going to take, after about 2 rounds of 3 colleagues each, I'll let Alex come in, and then I'm going to go to Rachel Bayliss, Jim Lewis, and Ruth Levin, and then I'll take the next 3 that I've got showing up as well. But if Alex, if you can come back in first.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, you know, playing second fiddle to this excellent speaker going first, taking all of my salient points. But in my experience, you know, it's the key part of organising any start, it all starts with agitation. It all starts with finding what is the thing that really pisses someone off, and then really kind of repeating that and then asking the question, why are you putting up with this? Because you're the only one that's allowing this to continue. And it is that sort of, you've got to be honest with them, and you've got to be brutally honest with them, and you've got to really tell them how it is. There's no painting a rosy picture. You got to say, you are being treated appallingly, and the only person that's allowing that to happen is you. And you've got all the power in the world to make it stop if you wanted to. But I think they only really believe that at the point where they take strike action and they see the absolute chaos that it creates when there's a workplace without them. And that's when they learn that lesson, and they're won to that idea of, well, actually there is dignity in the work that I do. It's just, it's not recognized by my boss. There is a social usefulness of the work that I do. It's just not rewarded in my pay. So yeah, that well, the second question, I've not had any good experiences with engaging with you know, the high and the mighty of local authorities. In my experience, and it might be because I'm a little bit of a cynic, but I think if you've got a director of environment that, you know, sits over waste, and he's paid £150,000 a year, and he's got an outsourced contract that he kind of has to look at once every 6 years. And then you go to him and you say, well, you know, you should bring it back in house. And then, you know, you're going to have to manage a team of people, and you're going to have to do daily work, and, you know, really earn that £150,000. You know, I think potentially, you know, he's making the choice, a rather cynical choices. I've got a really easy life. Outsourcing's worked out fantastic for him. He's earning 150 grand to look at a contract once every 6 years. And you know, if I was in that position, would I want to change it? I'm not entirely sure. So, you know, and also, you know, in a local authority, the amount of deference that is that the local councillors pay to these directors, and the amount of sort of advice and kind of like willingness to like listen to these arguments that the directors make, that sometimes are quite frankly kind of very flimsy, is astounding. So even if you're making a political argument with a, you know, potentially a comrade on the local authority, they'll turn around and say, well, you know, the director's given me all of these numbers, and they've told me it's absolutely impossible for the next 10 years, and like, he's been here for the last 30, so who am I to question it? I've just been elected. It's that sort of power dynamic that it needs to be broken down and broken away. And yeah, maybe I'm just being cynical, I don't know.
Definitely don't think that's being cynical on your part, Alex. I think your point around, yes, when we talk to senior managers on the other side, that is true. Right, okay, so I'm going to go to colleagues online. I'm going to take two groups of three. If you could say your name and your union, if you're happy to do that, please do so. If you don't want to say where you're from, that's also okay. Rachel, you had your hand up, but it's gone down, but I'm assuming that's because I mentioned that you wanted to come in. So Rachel, if you're still there, that would be great.
Yes. Perfect. Rachel Bayliss, GMB organizer. I've done various things in terms of like outsourcing campaigns, and Alex, you just made some good analysis regarding the relationship between local councillors and council officers, because from my experience of organising in councils, the level of lack of, I feel like as unions, maybe we don't make sure that we're telling councillors the perspective we're getting from members, because lies are so easily found out once that communication is in place. And often I think, you know, I'm not the Labour Party's #1 fan, but I think they have a purpose if we've got a dispute, right, to try and leverage that sort of relationship in some way. But what do you think the answer would be, either Ezekiel or Alex, in terms of when they don't fine the contractors? Because that is a huge, I think, huge barrier when it comes to organising and outsourcing. But also, you know, maybe this is answering the question, but with the narrative about being fiscally responsible that the Labour Party are banging on about, I mean, not getting money back from a contractor that's not fulfilling their obligations could potentially be a way to spin it. I don't know, but what are your thoughts on how you get around that issue, or plans, sort of thing?
Thanks, Rachel. And Alex, I promise I'm going to come to you first on this next round, but I said I'm going to take 2 more colleagues first. Jim Lewis.
Yeah, hi everyone. Jim Lewis from Unison. A quick observation, and then I'll ask my short question. The observation is that we seem to be getting mixed messages from the government. We've got Angela Rayner, which seems to be pushing the insourcing agenda, but on the other hand, we've got Wes Streeting, who seems to be hell bent on more privatisation in the NHS. It's probably something we can't form a question around at the moment, but no doubt we will be getting the answer to that as time goes by. Quick question. I'm very interested to hear that you sustained a campaign for 3 or 4 years, I think it was Ezekiel. And I'm just wondering, is there any, have you got anything you could pass down about actually keeping that motion, that motion going for 3 or 4 years? Is there any sort of formula that you used apart from sheer enthusiasm?
Thanks, Jim. And last on this round, we've got Ruth Levin.
Oh, thanks very much, and thanks for a really, really interesting webinar. My name is Ruth Levin. I work for Unison in our local government team. And just a few observations, and also I'm just going to highlight some stuff that I'll put in the chat. And some of it's picking up actually on comments that both Rachel and Jim have made, which is that this government was elected by, one of the planks was we're going to see the biggest wave of insourcing in a generation. So maybe a question around how do we see the roles of unions and making sure that this is delivered upon at a campaign level, at an organising level, at a branch level. I know that nationally, we've got to make sure that the 2-tier code that's going to come in the employment rights bill, that is really watertight and as strong as it possibly can be to make sure that it doesn't, that the economic advantage that employers see in outsourcing, which is always at the expense of our members, of workers, of their pensions and their pay, that advantage is removed as far as possible. And I just wanted to say to the webinar that there's a global union federation, the Public Services International PSI, who've produced a range of remunicipalisation resources, including an online training programme. So I'll put that in the chat. But there are loads of case studies from different countries around the globe, which might provide some inspiration for campaigns that we're running here across a lot of different sectors. And finally, just to say that I was having a look at the legislation around the railways, the public ownership, and that we should be seeing there insourcing of railway contracts. So I don't know if there's any colleagues here from any of the transport unions, but be interested in perspectives on insourcing and railway, and hopefully seeing that come into bear fruit in the coming months.
Thanks, Ruth. And I should have said at the beginning, we were due to have the RMT joining us to speak at this webinar, but because various stuff is moving quite quickly on some of our stuff, they've asked to do the next one because they'll have more, hopefully, good news to report on where that's going, obviously with a national train operating contracts, but also some very specific issues we've got in London with some of the operations on TfL, which are publicly managed. Lots of the contracts are still outsourced, including the underground cleaners, but also operations on the Elizabeth line and London Underground. So RMT will be definitely on the next webinar to talk about that stuff. So Alex, starting with you this time, if you could come back on some of those points. I've also made a note of them if anyone needs reminding, and then we'll come to you, Ezekiel, and then we'll take the next 3 colleagues.
Yeah, no, thanks. All really good points. I mean, what to do when the local authority doesn't find a contractor? It's something, obviously you've got to then push the forms of leverage that are going to affect the elected representatives of that borough, which is, you've got to basically make a big song and dance to all the constituents about the money that's being wasted by the local authority. You've got to really sort of broaden out that sort of coalition and start building that coalition, because then it's not just about a contractor dispute, it's about taxpayers' money being used to effectively undermine that dispute. I mean, I know what I'd like to do, but I don't know if I can go to prison for a number of years, because ultimately the decision that they make is really harming the future lives of hundreds of workers, and they make that decision knowingly because we've told them so, and for some reason, and I've never been given a good enough reason or any reason as to why they don't choose to do it. They choose to take that stance, and it's baffling. The other point, well, I mean, how do we deliver upon the promise of in-housing from the Labour government? Like, I really hope that they do follow through with the promises. I think realistically, a political decision to bring in-housing to start in-housing contracts is ultimately a decision that can be reversed if the fortunes change at the next election. And what we need to do is we need to build a movement that's effectively able to weather that sort of political change, and create the material conditions that make outsourcing of contracts unworkable. And I think that is the only way, is to basically have a really aggressive, hyper-focused industrial campaign on wages, terms and conditions across the sector.
Thanks, Alex. Ezekiel.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Alex. So there was questions about how we managed to keep the momentum going for about 3 or 4 years, and that took a lot of work. But the reality is, when we started the campaign, it's about building the base organizing unit at King College and create that sense of collectivism, and the members start to believe in a trade union movement. So it had to be a kind of a learning from the members about the meaning of that collectivism and what they can achieve. And despite the fact that in some moments it was the branch and the region who said, insourcing is what we should be doing, we listened to what the members wanted, and we target what the members' issue had, and start to win local small campaigns that mattered to the member, that were really important to them. And it's constantly learning about what can be achieved. And something that actually was fundamental is the fact that everybody started to believe that outsourcing was part of the problem and the solution was insourcing, and members were happy to campaign to win. And despite the fact that it can take 3 years, they were actually adamant. When they understood what the situation was of being outsourced and how it could improve by being insourced, they actually felt very motivated, and they gave ownership of the campaign. So the campaign was started kind of a mixed approach, but then it was owned by the members. That's why we could keep that going for years. And also there was protests, actions, strike, and it was a lot going on. We didn't actually allow the campaign to drop. We were constantly doing something from the members' activism and until we won it. It's a lot resource intensive, but the first part is members need to take the ownership of that particular campaign.
Thank you, Ezekiel. I also said that I'd keep an eye on questions in the chat. Apologies. So I've got my colleagues that I'm going to call in now, and we're going to take those and then come back to you and Alex just to wrap up. But I've also got a question that Rob Hayes has put in, which is a question around how to secure support from your union at a regional level. If you've got a recognition push, if you're a group of outsourced workers and you want to be pushing for recognition, Rob, I think that's what you're asking. There's a very good PCS model of motion. I think Lois wants to come in a minute as well, which PCS in London and the South East passed around why they as a region should support outsourced recognition campaigns as well. But Rob, I've just put my email in the chat. If you want to send that to me, I can definitely pass that on to the Unison colleagues. I don't know which your region is, but who sit on our Work Matters group and get them to have a look at that as well. So as I said, it's a question around, what do you do if you've got support at a local level? How do you engage with your region to make sure that you're getting that support from other union structures as well? Which you may or may not want to come back to, Ezekiel and Alex after this, but I'm just going to take these in order. We've got Mike Hope, PT Whitehouse, Abigail Hunt, and then I'm going to take 4 if Lois is still there, but her hand may have disappeared. We did have Lois Austin from PCS as well, but so in that order, Mike Hope first.
Right. Thanks. And Alex and Ezekiel, both of you just absolutely brilliant, absolutely excellent, and lots of ideas. Now, I'm from Suffolk Unite community, and we put together a comp, Keep Our NHS Public group for Suffolk. But the campaign is actually being run by Unison, and it's the snappily titled ESNEFT, East Suffolk and North East Essex Foundation Trust, 2 big hospitals, Colchester and Ipswich, and then a community hospital, which is Aldborough. Now, it's complicated by the fact that in Colchester, the soft services staff, that is all non-clinical, are being faced with a threat of outsourcing. In Ipswich and Aldborough, they were outsourced, and they're now looking at this as not, they hate it. Of course, it's crap. And they are looking to come back in-house. So, the two Unison groups have joined together on that basis. And they are also very, very clear that they're doing this on behalf of patients and the public, and there are very good reasons for that. I mean, the trust hasn't helped itself because the chief exec, who's the smoothie Nick Hume, who you see on BBC News all the time, behind all the smoothies are all alleged bully and alleged, he has allegedly lied to them about decisions having been taken when they haven't been taken. And obviously, the more this gets in the public eye and the more contention there is, then the more difficult it is for the final decision to be taken as management would like. So, but it's a positive campaign. But I mean, what we kind of see is that very clearly, I mean, outsourcing only exists to cut corners and to chisel away at standards. We know that. And that's in relation, as the Ipswich and Aldborough staff already know, to their wages and terms and conditions, holidays, sickness, blah, 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 all the things we've spoken about. But also in terms of standards, they have to do more with less time. Corners are cut. They are encouraged to just do the bare minimum to tick the box. That's contract culture. That's what it does. And that is actually, those are the longer term issues that are always going to be there. There is a lack of consistency, a lack of continuity for public services, which require both. And
Mike, sorry, it's an incredibly important campaign.
Sorry,
right.
I just got to say this.
Got 3 other colleagues coming in the next 10 minutes. So
things will go wrong. And, there is no alternative sometimes, easy life or not. There was a whole hospital a few years ago, Hinchinbrooks Hospital in Huntingdonshire, which wholesale was outsourced to Serco. They had to hand the contract back because they couldn't deliver. Everything nosedived. So very briefly, it has to, they are all arguments for insourcing, and it cannot go in any other direction.
No, thanks, Mike. And I think the SNET campaign is a hugely important one because, as you said, if that's a trust, as we know, who are trying to outsource at the same time as the government are talking about a massive wave of insourcing, we have to beat that. And I think the campaign down there that the union are running is fantastic and absolutely superb stuff on social media, but a brilliant thing about how they're linking, as you said, up with patients about what the services are that are suffering in that. And we have a big demo there on the October the 19th, which was excellent. So thank you for that. PT Whitehouse. I think you were next.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. It's Paul Whitehouse. I'm a Unison.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm a Unison lay rep in higher education. Yeah, again, I just want to thank both the speakers for their excellent contributions today. I've learned a lot and taken a lot of notes, so it's been very useful. But yeah, I just want to pick up on a point from each speaker. One was the kind of issues that are faced after insourcing. Once you've won that kind of battle and that campaign, and you've got the members in house, We ran a similar campaign where I work, which we won to insource the cleaners, and we had kind of problems both during the campaign and afterwards. The main problem during the campaign we found was the lay reps, because they were outsourced workers, a different employer. We had a recognition agreement with our own employer about facilities time and what time we could give in work to our union activities, but that didn't factor into representing outsourced workers because it was a different employer. We had to take that to our regular negotiating meetings with our management to try and get something. But the more we got involved in the campaign and the more casework we picked up, the bigger that problem became. And we just didn't have enough resources. We didn't have enough time. We even ended up with a few of our lay reps on disciplinaries because the outsourced the contractors' premises where they work, where we could engage with their management to pick up these problems, was on the other side of London. They weren't willing to come to our campus or where their workers worked. So that was a huge issue for us. I mean, those disciplinaries got dropped because we just threatened them with undermining our recognition agreement in the end on that. But that was the problem. And one of the main problems once we won that campaign and got them insourced was, as Ezekiel mentioned, a lot of the cleaners were migrant workers, and there was a largish number of them whose status. Their right to work and their settled status, etc. That wasn't, up to. None of it was agreed, and it wasn't checked. The new employer did do those checks, and we found that in a lot of cases, they just didn't have a right to work, or their right to work hadn't been renewed, or their settled status hadn't been renewed, etc. And we found that a lot of those workers, that created a lot of problems as well. And also the issue just around overtime and regular, fair proportion of work, etc. And I just want to pick up on something Alex said about how this is a broader outsourcing and privatization of public services, etc. It's just a societal wide kind of issue, and just whether during any of the campaigns, although I mean our councils now essentially you're just kind of management, and all of the services and all of the workers are being outsourced. And when you're approaching the local authorities, you're essentially just approaching the administration and the management of those contracts. But nonetheless, there's a considerable size workforce, and many of them, all of them, do have recognised unions and recognised agreements to negotiate with the employer, etc. And whether they'd approach, their particular campaigns through that channel and getting the workers. The already organised workers essentially within the council to channel up the campaign and channel up the issues through their negotiating structures. We did that where I work at LSE. We were able to ask them to cost insourcing and things like that, and we were able to constantly sort of refresh that campaign by bringing it to the ease of management on a fairly kind of regular basis, 2 or 3 times a year. So whether they'd rather than just kind of concentrate locally, negotiating with the local outsourced manager, but taking it to the council management who have their their hands and ears on the finances, etc. And I mean it's okay winning those kind of pay battles, which are the key thing. But that just leads to lobbying for increased council tax and increased kind of higher charges for the services to cover those costs. So obviously the ultimate goal is to get it back in house, or get the services back in house and properly kind of publicly funded with accountability and the democracy that entails, etc. I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Paul. Those are really good points, which you said. We'll hopefully have a little bit of time to come back on. So I'm going to take Abigail and then Lois. Lois, I'm hoping you're also going to take the opportunity to just flag your demo tomorrow as well when you come in, because I was going to do it at the end, but if you can do it, that would save time. Abigail.
Hi everyone, I am Abigail Hunt. I'm TUC National Policy Officer in the Public Services team, and I lead a lot of TUC's work nationally on kind of insourcing procurement and public contracts. Thanks for the great presentations, really inspirational work that's been going on. I just had a question around the kind of financial case for insourcing and to what extent you've come across perceptions of increased costs associated with insourcing during the campaign. At national level, with the biggest wave of insourcing that's been pledged by the Labour government, one of the things that we've long tried to do at TUC, hand in hand with several of our affiliates, is really make the case of how insourcing represents value for money for the public purse. And just to be clear, of course, what we mean by this is not value for money as lowest cost, as has often been perceived, over years and decades, and used an excuse for outsourcing. But having multifaceted conceptualization of value for money. That insourcing can deliver good jobs, quality public services, transparency and accountability for the public purse, and so on. But in all honesty, we've had great difficulty doing this. What I wondered is suppose two things really. To what extent have you come across perceptions of increased cost as a result of insourcing during the campaigns? And have you worked with kind of making a financial case for insourcing during the campaigns? If so, how did that go? And once the services and of course the workers were insourced, have you continued in any way to kind of keep track of financial implications of delivering the service in-house? And if so, what does that look like? That'll be really helpful to know more about. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Abigail. And last but definitely by no means least, Lois.
Okay, thanks, Sam. So first of all, this meeting is a result of our LESI TUC Outsource Workers Committee, isn't it, Sam? So it's brilliant that we've got everybody here and it's been a really success and everybody's sharing their experiences and all of the unions are working together because that's what we've been pushing for on that committee. So that's really good. I agree with all the contributions and what people have said, but what we have found with our outsourced workers, I'm from PCS trade union, so it's workers that have been outsourced on government contracts, so the cleaners, the caterers, on the security guards for the big government buildings and the government estates, so DWP, Foreign and Commonwealth Office, all the buildings around Whitehall. And what we have found is that everyone's right about the time that you need to put in and the building up of confidence, organising, recruiting, campaigning for recognition and all of that. But what we have found right now is that actually the anger and the militancy amongst this section of workers, the outsourced workers, is now is at a new level. That I think a whole load of things have combined: the cost of living crisis, the fact that you just cannot live. I mean, you never could, but now trying to live, pay rent, particularly in London, pay rent, bring up a family, pay your bills, when you're earning 11, 12, 13 pounds an hour is absolutely impossible. It is poverty pay, it is poverty work conditions. And I think we've seen, in politics, things rumble along, don't they? And we're all working really, really hard to recruit and to build the union. And then there's a change. And I think that's what we've got at the moment. And I think there is a real militancy and a real preparedness to fight. And the anger on those picket lines and demonstrations of our G4S members, our OCS members, our ISS members, the anger is palpable, and they've had enough. It really is, enough is enough. Quantity has turned into quality, and they have had enough. So it's about good organisation and leadership, and these workers will fight. We need to give that leadership, organise them as best we can. Obviously, we need them to organise and have their leadership amongst themselves. But to start off with, we need to do it, build that confidence, and we can win for these workers. And we have won on a number of these government contracts: sick pay, union recognition, increases in pay. and as I said, it's really about the militancy which now exists amongst these sections of workers. And the next step is insourcing. And I think we have to combine our demands around pay, sick pay, union recognition, and insourcing. It has to be there in the list of demands that we're putting forward. And I think we have to turn the anger of these workers onto their employers, onto the people who let the contracts. So for us, it's the Government Property Agency, the DWP, who run the contract for the security guards, the G4S security guards that are currently out on strike. So onto those contract holders, but also onto this government, because they did promises.
Sorry, Ezekiel's got to go to another meeting, so I just want to double check if he's still online in case he wants to come back on any of those points, because I've shared this badly and we're over half-past now.
Right, but we've got a demo tomorrow, 10:30 G4S HQ for the G4S security guards that are out on the big government total facilities management contract, and we've got OCS members out on strike, and we've got G4S in DWP out on strike and G4S in this total facilities management government contract, mainly around Whitehall, but also Canary Wharf. So please support that if you can.
Sorry to cut in. Is this the G4S DWP where G&B is recognised and you're still striking?
Yeah, we're still striking, yeah. Because in an hour pay offer, pay award, which we didn't expect.
I'm going to time out on this one because this is an ongoing discussion between your two unions about that dispute, although some of that stuff that Lois was just mentioning was their wider Whitehall dispute, but there is the ongoing issue about the G4S contract of the DWP, which is G&B recognised some PCS members at the headquarters section. But I really want to turn to Ezekiel before Ezekiel has to jump off for another meeting and then come back to Alex. It's my fault because I've taken us over time, but
that's thank you, Sam. I just going to be very briefly because my other meeting have started, so I apologize. I do need to rush out, but I'm going to make the answer. I'm going to comment on the chat what was about recognition that you say, Sam. Since Unison always support recognition agreements and campaigning for recognition. What you need for recognition is a solid base. You need your members to join. If you get the number, you will get recognized. Unison regions and everybody in Unison will support a campaign for recognition. It's just about, it's not easy to go to statutory recognition because if you miss the 50% threshold that you need, you cannot apply for 3 years to be recognized for the statutory recognitions, and that's a huge risk. That's why before you go to recognition, for statutory recognition, you need to try to go through voluntary recognitions and campaign for voluntary recognition. They will be better than statutory recognition, but be careful to be to statutory recognition because if you miss the threshold, then it's gonna turn into very bad because the employer will feel very powerful, and you won't be able to reapply for 3 years. Anyway, I need to go. Thank you very much with UC, my colleague Alex Chimbi, and everybody on this call. It has been a pleasure. Have a lovely afternoon. And I do apologize, I need to go, but my other meeting have started. Thank you all. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Go, Finn.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Just take care. Alex.
Yeah, okay. Where to start? At PT Whitehouse, I think you made some very salient points and drawing on your own experience as well within housing. I think the important point is like we can use these in-house workers as a support base, but we've got to be very careful. One, that we don't use it to substitute the actual workforce that are in dispute. And two, like we've got to recognize as well that sometimes the way that outsourcing functions is that these workers are diminished in the eyes of the in-house workers, and that there's a real kind of generational divide, not generation, but through the time it's been outsourced, sometimes 20 years, there's been this divide between these two sets of workers grow, and there is a real difficulty sometimes in bringing them back together and people seeing their demands as legitimate. Rightly or wrongly, it's something that I've come across in the past, and I think I think potentially, I don't know about arguments for council tax rises. I think they've always got an argument for a council tax rise at the moment, whether it's in-house or out-house or paying an increased cost. But realistically, you've got 5 years of a contract life, 5 years plus of a contract life. And in that time, you've got 5 potentially pay deals to make outsourcing impossible and in-housing the more attractive option. And that's how I think you should use that time in the lifespan of those contracts. Abigail, I've come across, actually very interestingly, in Merton, the contract is coming to an end for ID Verdine, which is a grounds contractor, looks after the parks in Merton. And the directors made an argument against in-housing, saying it's going to cost them £500,000 more to in-house than it would be to get a 2-year extension for ID Verdi. And in that, in those sums that they've done, they've not included any of the extra contractual or non-contractual spend. And they've made the argument to the members that, you know, a lot of that is capital spends that they'd have to spend anyway. But they don't, you know, obviously hidden within that detail, it's got a sort of 20% put on any quote that they've been given. And obviously ID Verdi is themselves outsourcing parts of the contract to other other groups. So there's hidden costs all the way through it, and it is a real kind of mess to try and get to the truth of it. And I think realistically, like, I always like to make the argument more that, you know, why are we having a set of workers that are essentially basically indentured servants and paid less than the in-house workers? And why are you making your savings and your counts off the backs of hard-working people? It doesn't make any sense, especially if we've got a Labour Council that's doing it. It doesn't make any sense to me. And if they're not willing to, on the basis of that, then I think the only way to really, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but rocket up the cost of the outsource contract by rocketing up the amount they're having to pay out in wages. Louise, I think you're right. We need leadership to build confidence and channel that anger. And I think what we're seeing at the moment is a real sort of growth across all the unions of workplace leaders and strike leaders that have taken on huge industrial disputes, and they are from, in my experience, they're from these outsourced workers, and they are really the future of the trade union movement. They've got a ton of experience. They've won time and time again, and they are, you know, dyed-in-the-wool trade unionists that will become, hopefully, if we're very, very lucky, the future leadership of our trade unions. Because I you know, my job's very simple. I tell people that they're having a bad time and that they should do something about it. Their job, what they do is they're spinning gold and they're making magic. And it's really being coming from a background of being a lay activist. You know, it's really, really difficult, and they are succeeding all the time. And I think, you know, if we hold on to these people and we develop them and we bring them into you know, leadership positions in our union, it can only do us the world of good. I think what we're doing, the work we're doing, the reason it's important is because realistically, the future of trade unions is there, and the future leaders of trade unions is there.
Alex, that is an absolutely brilliant point to finish on. I'm sorry I've taken us over time, but I really wanted to get those points in. Rachel's making a very good point there around an ongoing dispute that's in the TUC system at the moment, so I'm not going to come back on that. Just, I will do one quick plug for our regional Black Activists programme, which you can get information out, is all on the TUC website. But we've had a couple of really fantastic outsourced reps who've come onto that program this year. We're running that again next year. As Lois knows, we're working on the regional program aimed at outsourced reps, and I know lots of unions are doing this, but short kind of training, because exactly as you said, Alex, this is our next generation of leaders coming through right there. So the next one of these webinars will be early-ish in the new year, we're going to have colleagues from the RMT, but we're also going to look at how we make that commitment to a massive wave of insourcing a reality. And I've taken notes of all the other questions. Then a lot of that came up, points Abigail was making and other colleagues are making about how we get that. So we'll do that. We'll make sure, I know a lot of people had to drop off this call, but everyone who was on this call gets an invitation to that as well. Yep, please stay in contact. Alex, I know Ezekiel's gone, so I'll thank him afterwards, but thank you so much, Alex. That was brilliant. You did more than step in to Helen's place there. That was superb. Thank you, everyone, for staying with us, even though we've gone over. Look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, comrades. Take care. See you soon.